Juni, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation. I
No,
like the shirt, by the way.
no, thank you. I got this when I went back to the US to like visit family. So now I feel at home everywhere. Like Wu-Tang forever. So man, I wanted to, we're here to talk about your book, Djeliya. We're here to talk about you, your work. So for anyone that doesn't know you, like anyone that's never read your work, never heard your name, never seen you, what would be like the 3 words that you think like describe you the best?
Cartoon Network meets anime. I mean, technically, yeah, Cartoon Network is going to count as one word. So yeah, Cartoon Network meets anime, I think, because my influences have changed quite a bit since then, but you can still like have the basis of what I grew up with. And that stuff doesn't go away. Like as much as I try to like distance myself from certain things, there are certain influences that just don't want to leave. And I'm fine with it. Like I like it when I still receive messages from people who are like, yeah, that reminds me of Samurai Jack. And I'm like, yeah, that's mostly because I've been watching Samurai Jack for like every year since I discovered it when I was a kid. So yeah, I'm good with the comparisons.
Okay, perfect. I mean, that was the thing that stuck out to me the most as well, like while reading it, just the style that does kind of like, you can tell there's an influence of Samurai Jack, not only like in this, a little bit in the storytelling, but more so just visually and like the energy and the framing.
Yeah.
But embrace your influences, right? Like you gotta embrace your influences. Okay, like just even going along with that, like aside from like Samurai Jack, were there like
so like the media diet when I was a kid was a mix of like French comics and a lot of what was on TV. So the main 2 channels that I would cross path, well, there were 3. There were like manga, which was essentially manga, like a whole lot of anime. So either 1980s or all the way through early 2000 anime. And at the same time, I would change the channel to Cartoon Network. So that would be like the main names that come to my mind right now are like the Powerpuff Girls, Teen Titans, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and Dexter's Lab. And I mean, there was a whole lot of shows that I was just like, I would spend my time on TV, and then the rest of the time would be spent like on those 2 channels, and the rest of the time would be spent on the cinema channels, I guess, the ones where I would be watching movies that were not intended for children at all, and I would just like I used to make the joke that like I would spend every Wednesday at my grandparents' house, and grandparents taking naps is a blessing for any child who wants to discover things he's not supposed to, because they go upstairs and they go sleep for like an hour or 2, and you get enough time to at least get pieces of movies that you're not supposed to see. And like I discovered a lot of stuff that I was not supposed to, including like Djeliya. One big influence that you don't necessarily see is Mad Max.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I watched Mad Max 2, and I think the first one, and then I grew up and I watched them again, and I had this Mad Max aesthetic influence throughout my life because I grew up in Senegal, and I like rusty things.
Yeah.
Like run down things because of that, and I watched the whole Mad Max trilogy again when I was an adult, and I was like 5 when I saw this stuff. Like that was not the right age for me, but
no. And for those things stay there, it's like they're in your subconscious at that point. Like
yeah,
you experience it before you're 6. It's like they stick so much more deeply.
And it's weird because like your brain absorbs it and you keep remembering it, but not necessarily the way it actually was. Like there is one of the things that I like to do is rewatch stuff that I liked when I was a kid that I haven't seen since then. And like, for example, the Powerpuff Girls is a show that I still like very much, but it definitely seemed more complex and intelligent when I was a child. I watched it and I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna like binge the Powerpuff Girls today. Like it's fun and everything, but it's like it's still a show for little kids.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is, and it works really well as that, and that's why I loved it when I was a kid. And the older I get, the more I'm like impressed by the technique. But I'm not gonna be like, oh my god, this is so engrossing. I'm fully into the plot.
Yeah, it's not about the storytelling.
Yeah.
But that says a lot, because some series, like there are series that are kind of like playing directly to their audience, like narratively and intellectually. And then others are kind of like, not necessarily looking down, but they're kind of like pulling them up. Like if you, I rewatched Gargoyles, and I forgot how like dramatic and complex and like psychological and actually really dark the whole thing is.
Yeah, like my memory of Gargoyles before I watched it again last year was the opening, especially because the French, when they translated the show into French, something that they did that was really like the trend in the 90s was like Hercules and Xena Warrior Princess had a voiceover in the opening.
Yeah.
Gargoyles, the English, like the American version, didn't have a voiceover. The French version did, and it adds so much.
Really?
Like
I think there was
French. Like, okay, you know how Goliath sounds in American.
Yeah.
The French actor had the same voice. He wasn't the same guy, but the voice was basically the same. And he's the guy who was doing the voiceover. So imagine like Goliath being like, "We used to live in the castle," blah blah, with the opening music and everything. Like that was metal. Like that was metal for me before I even knew what metal meant. So yeah, so there was that, and the vague memory of a wizard kind Mordred, maybe some Arthurian wizard who took a magical book and ate it whole. And when I was a kid, that traumatized me. So like that was the only thing that I was able to remember from the show, aside from the fact that I loved it when I was a kid. And yeah, that's a good example of a show that you watch again as an adult, and you're like, yeah, this is still something that I could be watching at like 27. I was.
Yeah, it's some things just like transcend that.
Yeah.
So like, what other stories like for you that really like connected with you, do you think, early on, like genre, out of genre, or even just like folks tales? Like what do you think of the stories that really connected with you?
It's a weird mix. It's like, again, there's this whole tendency I had of watching movies that were meant for adults and teenagers when I was a child. So you just kind of end up absorbing notions that you're not old enough yet to understand. And you also have the influence of the people around you. And so like it creates a weird mix in your brain of like, I started inventing stories before I started drawing.
Okay.
So I would do it in my toys, for example. I would just imagine stories, and they would very much be in the vein of what I was watching on TV or reading in books, and what I was told by the people around me. Like my grandma, the story I like to tell is the story of my grandma being like, don't go out at noon, or like the demons are gonna come and get you, basically. Which was a trick to convince us, the children, to not go out when the sun is the highest, because you can get sunburn and everything. But instead of just telling us that, they would be like, yeah, monsters are gonna come and try to eat you. And what I found very funny was that my reaction to this was, I've been watching Power Rangers, I know how to fight monsters. So that's how it like influences the way you develop, because you start seeing everything around you with a sort of like fantasy goggles at all times. And that was a bit of an issue as well, because my family especially were like, I was a very passionate child about Pokemon and all kinds of stuff. Like Pokemon is a taboo subject in my family because of me. No one wants to talk about it, and I kind of traumatized an uncle. Like the Pokemon craze of the 90s that you used to have like newscast about. That was about me, basically.
You were one of those kids.
Yeah. But like I was like that with a lot of stuff. So my family was a bit scared that I was like losing grasp of reality or something, and that I was unable to fully understand what the reality around me was, because I was always imagining new things, always like daydreaming, and every time you tried to have a serious conversation with me, I would always I would always like bring it back to some work of fiction that I like, or I would have a weird outlook on things, and so I get it, but at the same time, I've actually managed to make a career out of it. So now they're doing the African parent thing where they're backtracking, being like, "Yeah, we always knew you had like your path would not be very like common and everything." And I'm like, "Yeah, you couldn't tell me that when I was a child. You had to like traumatize me for years about how I was weird and incompetent or something."
I mean, were your parents strict even then with your training, like with your education? Like they were trying to steer you
Not
away from art?
not strict. No, that's the part where I was lucky, because like they wanted me to keep a grasp on reality, but at the same time, they never told me don't do this.
Okay, great.
Like the phrase was always do whatever you want as long as you work at it and you're good enough. And I think mostly because my dad had to go through the process of having the very strict parents and the whole, you're not going to do this, you're going to do this instead, which he had to fight against and ended up basically creating his own job. So he went about having children with the outlook of, let's not be very traditional about it, and let's give them the tools they need to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
But also the pressure of like, this isn't going to be easy, and now that's most of the pressure for me was there in terms of, am I going to be able to do this? Where it was a bit harsh was the whole like, my dad wasn't the kind of person who would yell at you. He doesn't yell, but he doesn't need to. And just the things he will say about how if you fail at school, you're going to keep failing for the rest of your life. Like, you can still tell that there was a bit of the education he received about it that was still there. So yeah, but yeah, he was supportive, and not just like in words, but like financially and everything. He supported me the whole way through, which is why I'm lucky in the sense that it wasn't easy for him either, and I would not be able to do this now if I hadn't had the support system that I had. So yeah, so he was like, he left me with a bit of mild trauma, but he was a good dad who did everything he could do.
It was motivating trauma. It wasn't like damaging, but more motivating.
Yeah, like in terms of the cliche of the African child who's traumatized by his parents, I'm really like the soft case.
Nice. I mean, even speaking on that, were you then growing up between France and Senegal, or are you mostly in Senegal?
Mostly in Senegal. Like, I basically went back and forth because the part of my family is in France and has been in France, or Belgium or Switzerland and stuff like that. So I would basically just hop every summer going to Europe, assuming my grades were good enough. But that's one of the rules, like that I grew up with. If your grades are good enough, you go to Europe. If they're not, well, you stay in Dakar and you wait for summer to pass.
Nice.
Which wasn't bad. It was just, the especially when you have the interests that we have. If you don't, Dakar at the time, and still now, there's a lack of access to a lot of stuff. So you grow up with what you have around you, with the limited selection in the library next to your house. But you grow up also having access to the internet, so you know what exists. Yeah. And so you're eager to get back to Europe next summer so that you can buy all the stuff that you have on your list, and that you can bring back and read over and over again and play over and or watch over and over again when you come back. Like, my childhood was a process of really appreciating things, because when you have one book that you buy in the summer, that's probably going to be a book that you're going to read again and again over the year, because that's part of the limited selection you have. And I can really tell the difference now, because I live in France, I have access to so much, and I have the internet, and I have my own income. So now when I buy something, there's a good chance that I'm going to read it once, and there's a good chance that it's going to be it. And that's really weird. Like movies, it's the same thing. I used to watch movies over and over again for an entire week. And now I watch a movie once, and watching it again, I'm like, yeah, but maybe I need to find another time and blah, blah, blah. And I've become spoiled, basically.
Yeah. It's like when you have unlimited options,
Yeah.
then you realize it's like you don't want any of them. They all kind of like cancel out. It becomes like noise, right?
Like the catalog of streaming services is a very good test for this, because I subscribe at this point to Netflix, Amazon, and Disney Plus at various moments in time. And sometimes even for at least two of them at the same time. But I noticed that I would just go on the streaming service, look at the catalog, and be like, I don't want to watch any of this. There's so much of it, and they all kind of blend together, even though they're not the same genre, but they all feel like they're the same thing. And when I'm done watching, especially when I binge something, when I'm done watching it, like there are shows on Netflix that I have watched, but I don't remember them at all. And then I get like an email being like, yeah, the second season of this show is out. Like, I watched that. So I just canceled the subscription on everything, because it's not worth it, and there's a sense of like disposability to everything, and I don't want to.
It's like the new fast food.
Yeah, and I don't want to approach stories that way. But that's not why I liked them in the first place.
There's different like pacing with how you're like taking these things in, because there's still conversation with the art.
Yeah, kind of like the last thing that I watched where I was really satisfied was the Green Knight.
Oh yeah.
And I watched it, like I waited for it for like years, because it's been in the boxes for so long. And then like I did something that I found myself not doing much anymore, which is I turned off every other device. I put myself in the dark and I just watched the thing. Mm-hmm. And it was like a religious experience almost. Like even the tone of the film helps in that vein. But like I was fully in it, and the movie is really one of those cases where like it spoke to me. It wasn't just entertainment; it actually spoke to me, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for now. Like I want to focus on things that I feel like they are going to bring something to me. And because of there's so much stuff that exists, I even find myself going back and like I'm watching the early seasons of The Simpsons right now. And like it is like I had never watched them, and it's actually much like I knew it would be good, but I didn't expect it to like touch me as much as it does. Like it works really well.
Maybe that says something just about how as you mature, like your perspective has expanded, you've had different experiences, and even some of like the jokes. Like I've done the same, watched The Simpsons again recently, but like even some of the jokes at that time, you get the slapstick things as a little kid, but then when you're an adult, you start relating more to the adults and the experiences they're having, just of like life and work, and with people.
Like there's an episode yesterday that almost made me cry, where they tell you how Lisa was born. Yeah. And they have this running gag through the whole episode of Bart calls Homer. And he's always like, call me daddy, Homer, call me daddy, Homer. And then Lisa is born and call me daddy, Homer, same. And the last scene of the episode is him putting Maggie to bed, saying something like, the more the children learn to talk, the more they talk back. Yeah. And when he closes the door, she takes off a pacifier and she says, daddy. And that's her first word. And I'm just like, it's so good.
Episode.
Yeah, like it is so earned and so heartfelt from a show that honestly I was not expecting this, because everything I was exposed to from The Simpsons was stuff that was coming out at the time in like the 2000s and 2010s. So like I was like, Simpsons in my mind was more of a dumb thing. Okay. I didn't know that it was that good and that it had a soul, basically. Yeah. I used to have, at least.
It did. Like that's when I think I'm a little bit older than you. Like when I started watching The Simpsons, I think I was like 8, but it was like right when it came out, and like 92, started watching it. And so the first few seasons I saw like directly. I stopped watching it when I went to college in 2002. So like everything after 2002, I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
I see like little spots here and there, but then everything before that, for me, like that's The Simpsons.
Yeah, that's basically my position. So yeah, so that's how I try to approach things. Comics is the same. There's a lot of comics coming out, and I try to focus on the ones that I know I'm gonna be very engrossed by. So the last one was The Many Deaths of Lila Starr. Well, like managed to make me cry like 3 times, and I'm not even sure why, because like it's one of those cases where like you're reading the book and you get to the passage and you start crying and you're like, no. Like you can't stop the thing. Yeah, so yeah, I try to focus on media that makes me feel like I'm getting some substance, I guess, because there's so much of it, and the fast food is bad food.
It's disposable. It's disposable entertainment, and
yeah, basically, yeah.
But I wanted to ask you then, like, just speaking about this idea of like a conversation between art and people, like what do you want your readers to get out of reading media? Like after they've closed the last page and they like take a breath, like what do you want them to come away with?
It's kind of funny because originally I was just making this for like the adventure aspect of it. Like the basic goal was I grew up like reading manga that was so inspired by Japanese folklore. Why don't I do something similar with like mine? And so originally it was just supposed to be some kind of my version of a shonen thing, and then I think it's because I grew up in a family that was so politically minded. It started like taking so much into it and talking about so many different things. And so in the end, like I wanted originally people to have fun with this, but now that it's done, on top of having fun with it and like enjoying the world and the characters in it, I feel like I also kind of want people to start thinking about the system they're in, basically, because that's basically what the story comes down to. Like the characters grew up in a system that they don't necessarily understand where it comes from or why it is the way it is, and they are the whole point of it, especially at the end, is just question and decide what kind of action you want to take. And the things that they talk about, the themes in it, the situations they find themselves in, apply to every nation on earth. And so yeah, I think basically that's what I kind of want. I want to spark a thought in people's minds, I guess, with a book that was intended originally to just be a fun adventure book.
I mean, it still is a fun adventure book, but you get like more, you just get all these other layers. Not only, for me, I enjoy reading things that they're very specific. Like I can tell that there's a Senegalese background to the work, and the fact that there's mixtures of local proverbs, but then also it's Arabic, like from, so you see these small influences that are spilling over. It's a fantasy world, so people can kind of remove themselves from thinking it's like a specific place, but it's an allegory. It's an allegory for the world.
Yeah, basically, because like a lot of the research that I did, the folk tales work basically like that. Like it's a weird thing where it supposedly takes place in your surroundings of the time when the story is told, basically, but they are also removed from your surroundings, kind of like, I mean, that's how it works for every folktale. Like there's a sense of like the Red Riding Hood takes place in Europe, but it's not really Europe. It's not a real one, like the wolf talks and everything. And but it creates a weird half dimension where everything has a meaning and everything is a symbol, basically. And I really like that aspect of it. And West African folktales do that a lot, having animals represent certain notions or behaviors, Even just like crossing paths with an animal or a stone has a meaning, and you don't know the meaning because the guy telling you the story is the only one who does, and he's not going to tell you because you're supposed to have access to a certain level of knowledge before he, like, it's insane.
Exactly.
But for some reason, it still works in giving you the basics that you need to understand the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated by that. So I tried to sort of do something in the same vein of like, I want to have a story that tells you something about the world or yourself, and uses very archetypal characters, very archetypal situations. Yeah, so that was me trying to sort of make a comic out of the folktales that I would hear about or read when I was a kid, that I read again and discovered a bunch more when I was doing the research for this.
Amazing. I mean, that really speaks to this idea of like, the more specific you are, usually the more universal it is, right?
Yeah.
Like even thinking about like Joseph Campbell and like the hero's journey, but just like human experience.
Yeah.
Like, it's completely universal. We have the same folk tales, different names, and they're just representing different aspects.
There's something that I found funny was that I was reading a very old tale, and I realized that it actually reminded me of a few Hellboy stories. And I mean, the lineage between the two is very obvious because Mignola is the kind of person who uses folktales a lot for his stories. And that's why, like Hellboy, I went back to Hellboy as like a template for how to turn these things into comic books. So yeah, but it was very funny to see how basically this white dude from wherever in America had vibed with the folktale template so much from so many different sources, including African ones, that he was the first time I read a comic book inspired by African cultures and made by a white person, where I was like, yeah, he actually got like the gist of it. He understands how to tell the story in a way that feels genuine, not necessarily authentic. And even then, like I if you had told me like an African person had done this, I would like, yeah, okay. Like the Makoma story that he did with I can't remember the name of the artist. But the if you had told me that an African person was responsible for the writing of this, I would be like, yeah, Corbin, I think it was, who drew the Makoma story. Oh. So yeah, that shows, I think, that there's a sort of some commonality in folktales throughout the world. There are certain things that just keep coming back, and you get the same vibe from that as you get from a story where Baba Yaga shows up in Hellboy, and a bird and a bear start talking to each other about how she's the mother of Russia. And it's the same vibe as reading an African folktale where you're like, yeah, he's talking to a bee. Okay, sure. It functions the same. And I find that fascinating.
I think it's great that like you work like from yourself and from other artists now, like coming from the continent, are actually being able to expose the work more, because if you grow up in a Western country, you're only exposed to like Norse mythology. You don't even really get like Native American mythology so much.
Yeah.
Like, if you grow up in North America, you get some in South America with like Aztec mythology. Like for me, that was one of my first influences, like comics and like mythology, like Greek and Egyptian mythology.
Same.
But then it's really limited in terms of just like making sure you can have like African folklore as well. Like my family, we had those books, so I had access to those things. But just like a general audience, like if they go to the store, they go to a bookstore, or they go on Amazon now, like those things necessarily aren't at the top of the list. It's going to be like Neil Gaiman and something else. Maybe it's something Irish. And like it's kind of like stays there.
It's kind of funny because I guess that's where my luck was, in that I was lucky to be born in Senegal, basically, because I was obsessed with like Greek mythology when I was a kid. I was obsessed with dinosaurs and Egyptian mythology and everything, but it took me years to realize that the Senegalese folklore was folklore as well, and mythology as well. It's just that no one had ever decided to put it in a course in school, or at least not in the circles that I was in. Because like one big discovery that I made when I started working on this project was that like the basic post was, I've never seen this. And then I went on Google and I started like looking for it, and I realized that actually a bunch of people have been doing it for like decades before me. It's just that I was never given the platform. Like they were never given the platform, rather. I was never given access to them, or even told that they existed, bar from like a few little things that, again, because I was born in Senegal and the creators were Senegalese and well known, that's why I had access to it. So yeah, so the base problem to me is not that they don't exist. They do. Is the lack of platform and access.
Visibility. It's like getting equal visibility for all of these stories.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're getting there. We're getting there. We're making changes. Okay. So, I mean, even kind of like going along with that, what other creators on the continent, like not only influenced you, but creators who you like follow now?
Okay, I have a general one, which is the Kugali group.
Yeah.
Who are people who I've known, like I met them when I was right out of school and I was looking to find like-minded people, I guess. The whole, I graduated from an art school in France where they basically told me the whole West African fantasy thing, we're not sure that that's going to pan out. We're not sure this is something that you should pursue. And so I looked for other people who were doing the same thing, and I found Kugali, and it's a bunch of creators from different places in Africa.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of stuff to discover, and I'm really like happy about the fact that it's basically a bunch of kids who decided to create their own company, and now they're making a TV show with Disney. And I'm really happy that I was like part of the growth of it, and that I know these people. And then more specifically, there's one person who I'm not even sure he's affiliated with Kugali anymore. I don't know. Salim Bosuru, who like I'm just gonna ask people to like Google his name, Salim, Salim, and Busuru, Busuru, to just Google his name and look at his art. And I think that's going to be self-explanatory because his art is really good. Like his style is so freaking effective and so unique. And like I never told him that, but that like there's a bunch of stuff that he drew that I like took directly and started applying to my own because it's just too effective. So yeah.
Okay.
Like he's one of those people who I'm like campaigning for him to have, again, a bigger platform.
I mean, that's part of even succeeding in the moment, right? Like you also want to reach back and like make sure the people that inspired you also have a platform.
Yeah.
That, they get their roses.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if he was one of your influences, I wanted to even ask you about just like the character designs of Djeliya, because there are like, you've mentioned Mad Max, you've mentioned, folklore and like, using animals also to represent spirits. And so the story has kind of like both of these things, and even like a little bit of like steampunk in a sense. Like, what was your process for designing all the characters to make them all like really unique, really individual?
It's actually quite, wait, give me a second.
Yeah, good time.
My cat has started to like, yes, talking about you. So it took me like a year of figuring out the aesthetics of things first. And the logic of it at the beginning was I'm just going to take what Dakar looks like and add fantasy elements here and there, but keep the base of Dakar. Because something that I found really weird when I started looking into what other people were doing to create African-based fantasy and sci-fi was that they were basically just reusing Western designs and adding African patterns on them, and including African people. So they would use the superhero template and just add African colors or make a black person in the suit. And I just, no. So I decided that to make sure that I would be doing this in a way that would satisfy me, I would just just take Dakar and make a fantasy version out of it. So the ships, the spaceships, they're not even really spaceships, because like it's not space technically. It's weirder than that. And people just travel around in boats. So I just basically took the boats that I would use to go to an island in Dakar my whole life, and I changed the engine at the back and put them in the void, and that was it. I kept the fashion the way it was. I kept the buildings the way they are. I added a few older things, and I just like amplified the fantasy element of everything just a bit. And I added a bunch of talking animals, because that's strangely common in folktales of every nation. Like, I don't know why, but I find it great. Like, I love talking animals. I don't know why I have this fascination for them. Yes.
I think it's something that's in all of our just human evolution, like in the evolution of storytelling. Do you know this idea that the Aborigines have like the dream time, which is like a period of time, before invasion, and they say that in that time, they could talk to every living thing. They could talk to animals, they could talk to rocks, they could talk to trees. So I think, and just inherently, we all still have that want, and that there's maybe a hidden ability we can like kind of communicate these things.
Yeah, and even narratively, like the something that I found really fascinating with the views of animals in folktales was the whole every animal has a meaning, so to speak. Like, they all represent some kind of archetypal notion. So the hare, for example, is supposed to be crafty but also kind of paranoid. The hyena is a scavenger, so he is a thief and kind of dumb. And so the logic of how I would use my characters and what kind of animals I would be using and what they would look like came from what archetype are they. And like, my favorite one is the warhog that I have in the book, because he's like, that guy came about from the fact that I needed an animal that would inspire like brute force, but who, the second you see him, you're like, oh yeah, he's dangerous just by the size of him. And the part that I'm really happy about was that I initially wanted to use like an elephant or a rhino, because they are naturally that big. But I figured, if you take an animal that's already associated with brute force, but you make him larger than he's supposed to be in real life, that's going to be even weirder, because how the hell did you get that big?
Right.
So that's why I ended up with the warthog that I have now, with like, and why he has the introduction he has in the book, because I wanted you to have like the full force of how big he is right away. And he is an animal that I didn't necessarily have much information as to what kind of archetype he is, so I could play with that a bit more, compared to the hyena in that same first story. The hyena is a very well-known archetype in West Africa. He is used a lot in a lot of folktales. And like, so much so that he was, how in Western countries, when children misbehave, like they are threatened with the big bad wolf, like the wolf is going to come and eat you. But our version was the hyena. Like, if you misbehave, Buki is going to come and eat you. And that worked. That was when I was a very small kid. But anyway, so the base concept was that like I had a better idea of what kind of archetype he was. And I just mixed it with whatever things I wanted to talk about. And I was inspired by Idris Elba in the, what's it called again? Beast of the Nation?
Oh, yeah, Beast of No Nation, yeah.
Yeah, so I basically just took Idris Elba's body, added a hyena on top, like the hyena archetype, and I gave him a robot hand because fantasy again. Like, that felt right. Like, he's a pirate technically, so
Also,
so
that's like the anime influence again, the manga influence is kind of like cyberpunk nature.
Yeah, that's basically how I design things. I try to think of what the character represents, and like in the story, and what kind of person he or she is, and I create a design based on that. And then the rest is like, visually speaking, it's a lot of Cartoon Network and anime type logic in how to design things. So it's a lot of bold, blocky shapes. I try to make sure that every character has a silhouette that you can really identify, and that you get to understand who they are through the shapes that you use.
Yeah.
So like recently I reposted Ninja Turtles drawings that I made, and every time I draw a turtle, depending on who they are, I try to change the shape and the stature. So in my mind, Donnie is the tallest one and the leanest. Leo is the most basic in terms of shape and kind of the more handsome. Raph is the blockier, tougher guy. And because Mikey is the youngest one and the more lively, I try to like make him rounder than the others.
Yeah, a little
So,
softer.
yeah, basically, like I try to use shapes that represent something about the character, which is a very basic character design. Like that's usually how you're supposed to do it. There's nothing special about the technique.
Yeah, it's like often just in things that are aimed at, like if it's aimed at children, sometimes they kind of like skip that step. Like in the Ninja Turtles cartoon, a lot of them just look the same. Like they didn't have this very specific.
Yeah, but I mean, have you seen what they look like now?
No.
Like the last cartoon they made, they changed them so much. And in terms of design, it's not my favorite. I like it more in the more original style, like the way IDW does them. But in terms of like animation, like that's the best the Turtles I've ever looked. Like the fight scenes are just insane. This is like Naruto times 10. This is insane. Anyway, but in terms of giving each character an appearance that each suits who they are, they really went all the way. And it's not my favorite designs, but I like the philosophy behind the logic.
Yeah, and the specificity.
Yeah.
Okay. I won't keep you too long. You're a busy man. I mean, what's next for you? What else are you working on? If you can talk about it.
That's the thing I can't say.
Yeah.
Wait. I mean, I've been doing like covers for DC a bunch and for Boom Studios as well. There's a Batman audio adventure thing on HBO Max that's coming out, and they have a tie-in comic, and I did like 10 pages of a Robin story for that.
Nice.
That's coming out in October. This one is supposed to come out soon, I'm assuming, because I received this yesterday.
Great.
And I did the cover for that one. So yeah, so far things are gravitating more towards covers. I have other things like longer form projects, but I can't talk about them yet because it hasn't been announced, and I've even been told keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, I know. I know how contracts go. It's like you can't say anything until it's official.
It's frustrating too.
Yeah. Anyway. That's the end. Because you're like excited. You want to start talking about the thing that you're doing next, and yeah. So it goes. But we've got Djeliya to talk about and to keep reading. So hopefully everyone grabs it. So it's great. It's really, really great. Really impressive work.
Thank you.
No, thanks for joining me, man. Thanks for agreeing to like talk at 10 in the morning.
Oh yeah, it's fine. I was up at like 7.
Perfect.
I have a cat.
Yeah. So I'll let you get back to your day. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.